Hey, welcome to the Cory Morgan Show, new and improved. Now we've even got a new camera so you can see my pretty face in much more crystal clear color. We are upping our game all the time, removing all those little technical irritations so you can focus on the main irritation, which is me and my opinions blasting out at you. The reason we've been able to up our game and get things rolling is the Western Standard is doing fantastic. It's an alternative media source. If you haven't subscribed already, you really should. It's well worth it. Dave Naylor puts out some excellent news content. We got Linda Slobodian doing some fantastic op-eds and guest writers all over the place for just $10 a month. And you can get a free trial to test that out. You are getting content that is well worth it. Supporting an independent organization. You know, we don't take any tax dollars. The government's not offering us any tax dollars, but that allows us to speak and report critically and openly on the issues as you need them to be reported on. I mean, times like now where it just seems that the state and companies, you name it, are working harder to hide information from you than actually get it to you. We need to keep those sources of free information, speech, and press going. So thank you to those who have subscribed to us already. It's really been going great. And hey, if you haven't subscribed already, get on there, go to the westernstandardonline.com, take out a trial membership. You'll renew it, you'll keep it. It's well worth it. As well, we rely on our sponsors. You know, as we get more and more subscribers, there's more people want to reach out to you and advertise their products, services, and we've got some fantastic ones. One sponsor that's been great for us for some times is the Resistance Coffee Company. These guys are fun. So they're Western Canadian based. They're coffee roasters. They got a number of products. If you go to resistancecoffee.com, and these are the opposite of the woke companies that we're seeing all the time. You know, the ones are, you go out and buy a blanket or some towels or a bedside lamp or something. Then you find out that company actually gave a part of your purchase to some woke cause, some left-wing group that wants to actually shut you out of work. I mean, you just feel dirty. I don't want to give my money out there to somebody who's actually trying to put me out of work. Well, you don't have to worry about that with the Resistance Coffee Company. These guys take 10% of all your purchases, put it towards good causes like the JCCF, which is a legal fund which is helping people who've had their rights stepped on, things such as that. Again, if you go to their website, resistancecoffee.com, you'll see the good causes where they're standing up for your individual rights with 10% of your purchase going towards it. And the names of their coffee are great. They got Defund the CBC, they got Black Gold for their dark roast, Empty Promises for the decaf. Great stuff, and it tastes good. Not to mention, if you go there on your first order, if you enter the promo code Western Standard, all in one word, at resistancecoffee.com, you'll get 10% off your first order. So think about that. You're getting good coffee with fun names, and 20% of the money you're sending out is going to good things because 10% is going back in your pocket and 10% is going to those good causes that stand up for you. So give Resistance Coffee, check these guys out. They're sponsoring us. They're great. It's good coffee. I really did order it. I really have been drinking it. I'm not trying to sell you a swill because they're a good sponsor. I can give you an honest, good review on it. It's good stuff. Another sponsor, again, and you can see the pattern here, is the Canadian Coalition for Firearm Rights. And these guys, you know, the pattern is that they're groups that are standing up for your individual rights. And of course, firearm owners are having that right threatened. You know, orders in council from the Liberal government are making what were previously legal firearms illegal. They're trying to take away your property. These buyback programs are ridiculous. It's just wrong on every level, but we've got to stand up for ourselves. And you know, politicians, they talk big, but they do little. Well, these guys are out there, they're actually suing the federal government on behalf of firearm owners. So if you go to firearmrights.ca and you click on why join. They'll give all the reasons why to help them out, why they can help you out, and how important that is. So check them out, the Canadian Coalition for Firearm Rights, and click on why join at firearmrights.ca. Now, getting on to other causes and BS and bad media and poor coverage, I'm going to start in on the faux protests that have been going on for the last 5-6 days now due to Jason Kenney, Premier Kenney, announcing that basically COVID is going to become endemic. You know, Dr. Hinshaw came out, she said, look, we've gone as far as we're going to go. This is here to stay. We've brought it under control. Our health systems aren't being overwhelmed. We've got to start working on how to live with this disease going around now, rather than an active battle, rather than shutting businesses down, rather than forcing quarantining and testing and things. And whether you agree with it or not, I mean, the numbers are good. They're good. It's into August now. You know, these same people who are lighting up their hair on fire and protesting every day were the same ones screaming a month ago, saying when we took our masks off that the world was going to end. Well, it didn't. There hasn't been a death in Alberta from COVID in over 5 days at the point of this broadcast right now. You know, out of 4.6 million people, this is not a catastrophe. This is doing really, really well. Sure, some cases are going up, but you know what? The truth is, they're like the flu at this point. They aren't killing people, and that's kind of what matters, isn't it? But it's not enough for the crazed union crowd, and that's what this is, and that's what I want to go on about. So Dr. Joseph Vipond, you see his name, he pops up in front of the news. He's second only to Naheed Nenshi for stuffing his face in front of a camera whenever he can find one to blather his point of view. He wanted to turn his own daughter, if you research the guy, look him up, Joseph Vipond, into a little Greta Thunberg. He was chasing her around there, trying to get photo ops with Thunberg when she was out visiting here. He's heavy into the environmental issues. He's heavy into political activism. And he's also a heavy-duty NDP donor. Actually, if you go to CoryMorgan.com, you'll see I've got those pulled up. He donates thousands to the NDP every year. And hey, he's a citizen. He has every right to do that. Of course he does. But let's not pretend this is some unbiased doctor. It's like I talked about before. This is not a doctor who happens to be an activist. This is an activist who happens to be a doctor. Yet the media goes to him all the time as if this guy is the authority to speak to on COVID. And I mean, yeah, he knows his medicine to a degree, but you got to remember and temper it with his political agenda. And it is an agenda. He wants, so what he's called for, outright called for, is a general strike. He wants the whole province to go on strike. He's demanding the resignation of Kenny. He's demanding the resignation of Dr. Hinshaw. He's demanding the resignation of the health minister. And he's saying he wants to have everybody come out on a giant general illegal strike and bring the province to its knees and force that, because he doesn't want to wait a year and a half for an election. Democracy has never really been a big priority for socialists, though. And Dr. Vipond has demonstrated that in spades. So what we saw, though, so I went out in person to his kickoff. You know, there's going to be protests every day till the government's brought to its knees. And I tell you, they've been pretty sad. But I went in person because they're only a few blocks from the Western Standard office, and I checked it out. Let's see, is this going to be the seeds of this general strike? Is he going to bring the province to his knees? What I saw was political theater at its most gross. You know, and I took a lot of pictures. I put a video rant out there. For starters, Vipond's wearing his scrubs. The doctor's wearing his scrubs. You didn't come right out of the hospital. This is for show. I mean, if anything, if you did come out of the hospital, aren't these contaminated? Shouldn't they go into a special laundry? But of course, you want to look good. You want to look like the tired doctor in front of the camera. So you're downtown Calgary. Come on. I'm surprised he didn't have a stethoscope around his neck while he was at a little gurney back there that he could pretend to do CPR upon. But the media just lapped this up. So he set up in a low spot, you know, in the park, this low spot down there. It's outside of the courthouse at the McDougall Center. And it was really neat, and you can see in the pictures. Then the cameras all set around. There must have been 30 or 40 media members. Every possible mainstream media was out there. CBC French, the works. And that way, being down low with all the cameras around him and all the microphones in front of him, all of 40 or 50 protesters, 80 at tops if I want to be really generous, then could stand around and really make this look like a big crowd. So thankfully I was there to be able to actually stand back 100 feet and show, no, this is not a big crowd at all. This is actually pretty damn sad. Despite all the pumping, the hoopla, and noise, this was a small crowd. Within 10 minutes after Vipond speaking, that was the end of it. It was over. And the other neat thing, and I got pictures of there that may pop up, was the masking, you know, and Dr. Vipond said in his tweets, if you're not wearing a mask, you're not welcome. By the way, I didn't wear a mask when I went down there. It's our park too. I can go whenever the hell I want. There is no mask laws. Get over it, Joe. Don't tell me what to do. Well, Joe goes off to a side interview, of course, because again, he got cameras, he's got microphones, and he does his interview 2 feet from a gentleman, and he's not wearing a mask. He took his mask off because you can't do good political theater from behind a mask, I guess. CBC French, no less. And he did demonstrate Joe speaks fantastic French. Good on you. What is your ambition anyways? You know, are you looking federal? Are you looking to go further with things? Want to show that you can speak French? This absurdity, and it's still going on. And I listen, unfortunately, I torment myself. We don't have Western Standard Radio in my car yet. So when I'm driving, I listen to some other news networks, and they talk about the daily protests. You know, the province is still not backing down. And they're still going ahead with the full reopening of everything on the 16th, despite these daily protests. These protests are nothing. They're lame. They're bugger all. And I'm going to keep going down there. I'm going to keep watching them. And that's, again, yeah, here's the self-serving plug. If it wasn't for the Western Standard, if it wasn't for others going out there taking those pictures from 100 feet back to show what a bunch of BS this was, Anybody else tuning into the evening news would think there was some giant groundswell of opposition to these policies. I think some people are cautious on this. They're not sure if it's the right move, but obviously they weren't motivated enough to all come out en masse and actually demonstrate. They're going to watch and wait. That's the majority of the province, the vast majority of the province. A lot of those people down there protesting were holding up teachers' union signs and things like that. This is a union group. This isn't, the term for this is astroturfing. You're trying to make it look like there's a big public groundswell of support or opposition to something when there really isn't. And what the part that was more stomach-turning, astroturfing is nothing new, but was that complicit media down there not being critical whatsoever, basically participating with him to make this look like something it wasn't. And we've got to call that out. We've got to report on that crap, because we can't act properly as citizens if we aren't getting the right picture of what's actually happening outside. So the MSM, mainstream media, is letting us down yet again, and they've done so. So we're going to keep watching that. They're not far from the office. I don't expect this to blossom and develop into something, especially since as the days keep going on, the hospitalizations remain down and the deaths are not happening. We'll see. Time will tell. Now, I'll get on to something a little more positive. I've got a great guest coming up. Her name is Melissa Mbarki. She is very outspoken on Twitter. You might have seen her on there. She's with the Macdonald-Laurier Institute, and she speaks to Indigenous and Aboriginal issues. And I'm going to have a chat with her about Indigenous involvement in the energy sector, conventional oil field, gas, pipeline developments, things such as that, because you know, they're hitting the news, and again, the media portrays it as if First Nations are opposed to all development and that is tearing apart communities, and it's anything but the truth. But it's good to get some clarity from an expert like Melissa. So well, let's get on with it. Right, so I'm joined with Melissa Mbarki of the Macdonald-Laurier Institute. For people on social media, you might have seen her. She's been very outspoken on Twitter. She's Policy Analyst and Outreach Coordinator in Indigenous Policy. So it's a big field to cover in an important area that's been in the news a lot. So thank you very much for coming on to talk with me today, Melissa.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me.
And I know with what you work on is, again, as I said, a huge field. We could probably talk for hours, but what I'd kind of like to focus on today is the energy sector. You've worked in the energy sector for some time. We're finally seem to be coming out of the pandemic. There's been more demand for energy. We're reinvigorating our fields. We're getting rolling. But we just really want to make sure that our Indigenous partners are taking part and participating as much as possible. How are things looking in that front?
Things are looking a little better in terms of consultation and operators going out there and working with Indigenous communities. So that being addressed is making huge strides in the industry. I think what people need to understand is that Indigenous people don't oppose natural resource development. What they were opposing was the consultation piece that was often missed in First Nations communities. So we need to be aware of what it is that we're asking and what it is that we are opposing. And if there are people that are opposing certain lines, they have their own agenda. They don't necessarily even speak for the community that these lines are going through. So I think in the future, we need to start parsing out what the issues are and who is actually creating these issues and for what reason. Because once you get down to that answer, you'll find that the communities are actually in favor of many of these projects, because we do see the benefit that these projects bring to our communities in terms of workforce development, in terms of small businesses. Like it brings a really big it brings a workforce that we never would have had prior. So that's the stance that most of us are coming from. And I think we need to start listening to the voices of our chief and council and our elected leaders.
So yeah, I worked in the oil field for a long time and in isolated regions. And consultation, and I think respect is the biggest word that gets lost. I mean, no community wants to feel like companies are coming in and shoving them out of the way, or they don't want participation in a token sense. I think what we should be seeking is partnerships where we can mutually benefit, I imagine.
And that's one of the things that we've been asking for, are community benefit agreements, because that encompasses everything, from royalties to workforce to even areas of housing. You know, a lot of these operators have seen the deplorable housing that First Nations communities have, and they've actually stepped up and, you know, set aside funds for housing development and for, you know, renos in these communities. I grew up in a First Nations community, so I know how bad these houses can get. Like, I know just how, you know, the living conditions can be over. You can have four families living in one household, you know, and you know, anytime we get any kind of investment is huge in these communities. You know, when these agreements are signed, these are one of the things that first things that we look at is housing, water, social community programs. These are things that we put this money to, and a lot of people don't realize that. You know, like this money goes directly into the reserve. Whereas if you look at funding like from ISC, this money doesn't always 100% make it to reserve. You know, like it gets channeled through I'm going to say contractors. It gets funneled through think tanks before any of the money actually hits a community. So operations like this goes directly to communities. And I don't think people are seeing that. And I think they do need to realize that projects like this do greatly impact people on reserves.
Yeah, well, and like any other community, I mean, Indigenous communities are going to have multiple points of view. I mean, we'll never have anything where everybody agrees with the program. Part of the difficulty that we've been having, though, is the consultation's great, but we get multiple people saying they speak for the community. And while you might want to come in and really do consult, you're not sure if you're consulting with the right people. How is that going to be resolved in the future?
Well, how it's always happened is that before a band or a First Nation signs into an agreement, they have to take it back to their communities and it has to get voted on. So the process that we go through is called a band council request, where they bring the project forward. It's either a yes or no, you agree with it or not, and then the community members vote on it and they say yes or no. So most of the time, 80% of the communities are in favor. And the other 20% or even 10%, you know, those are the ones that you hear in social media. Those are the ones that are saying, no, we don't want this project to go through. But your community just voted. Like your community just went through this democratic process to say yes. And now you're coming along and saying, no, we don't want this. So I think at the end of the day, we need to figure out how the community came to this decision and we need to respect their decision as well. You know, it might not be a decision that I agreed with, but at the same time, if 80% of the people said yes, I go with it, you know, regardless if it was something that I agreed to or not. And I think a lot of people, they latch on to the ones that say no and say, oh, look at this is what's going on, when in actuality, it's not.
Yeah, well, and particularly with the Coastal Gas Link, for example, there was hereditary chiefs who were respected and members of the community who were outspoken against the program, though all of the elected members had been in favor. It's just difficult, I guess, and confusing to people outside of the community to know what's going on there sometimes.
Well, with the hereditary system, that's not something that we see across Canada. That's not something that you find in communities in Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba. This isn't something that's very common out there, and very few northern BC communities have this. So I think for you know we need to kind of get over that perception that they're the ringleaders in our communities. They do have a place in our communities, and the people do need to figure out what that place is for them. My grandfather was a respected elder, and the community went to him for advice. But at the end of the day, he wasn't the one that said yes or no to things. You know, like he guided them as best they could, and it was whatever the people decided. That was his stance on it. So different communities govern themselves differently. And I think the outside needs to see that. And they also need to realize that the hereditary system isn't for everyone. And it might be prevalent in some communities, but it's not for all. And that's not a system that I'm very familiar with. But just from what I see from the outside, you know, they need to get a community involvement. If their elected chief and councils got the community to say yes and they're saying no, they need to find a way to bridge that gap and they need to find a way to work with their people.
Yeah, so I mean, a lot of it's just, well, any community has their internal discussions and means, and it's not always a non-messy process. That's just to be respected. Something that's kind of excited going forward, though, is we're seeing more potential for outright investment and partnerships. Like there's groups that are considering investing directly into the Trans Mountain Pipeline and other projects. Have you seen much progress on some of these Indigenous groups and coalitions moving forward with these sorts of things?
We definitely see a lot more communities that are wanting to invest into these lines because we realize it's a vital piece of infrastructure, and we realize that it's the safest way to transport oil and gas. You know, if you see these train derailments that have happened in the last 5 or so years, they're quite high in number. And, you know, it's not the safest way to transport oil. I'm not saying, you know, we need to find a balance of it. We need to find a balance of rail type, you know, trucking if we have to. But at the same time, we can't rely on just one mode of transportation. We need to be able to get our product out there by multiple sources, and we need to make sure they're safe. So if people are having concerns with pipelines, then maybe the way to go is to increase regulations and to say, okay, maybe we need monitoring systems every so often, you know, so it does detect the leak right away. We need to be fighting for things like this and not saying no to entire projects. You know, we need to be working with industry to figure out solutions. And we're not doing that. Like we're just bottlenecking them every step of the way, and that's not the right way to go.
Yeah, well, and some good communication inside and outside of the Indigenous communities. Like when you get up north, pipeline right-of-ways, your average person would cross one and wouldn't even know it. They just think it's a cut line. I mean, they're not necessarily as detrimental or damaging. And actually, in some areas, I know a lot of trappers use them for access to their trap lines. They're handy for hunting. I mean, if they're well managed with erosion control and responsibly, they won't harm the region very much at all.
Not at all. And a lot of time these right of ways they're pretty small. Like I mean the average one is 15 meters in length. So they're not taking up a whole lot of space out there. And you know, everything from it being constructed and, you know, getting the line in, it follows really heavy environmental standards. You know, if they find a frog along the way, you know, they stop operations to make sure these frogs are relocated. A lot of people don't see this. They just see it as this bad thing. And actually, if you look at the industry itself, they follow some of the harshest regulations out there. And does that mean, you know, we can do better? You know, we can always do better. But we definitely need to find that balance between having these pipelines and creating a regulatory process that, you know, that will keep the environment safe or safer.
Yeah, well, and likewise, outside of that, when I worked on, say, seismic projects, we'd be in and out of the area. We would bring in monitors from the nearest communities in the area to show us traditionally sensitive areas, keep us away from areas where we might be doing damage that we're not fit for our sort of operations and things such as that. People don't realize that we are making those efforts to avoid and keep the impact as low as possible and keep the communities dialed in. And we would hire a lot of local people when possible too, particularly for brush clearing and that, because they're familiar with the area and they're fantastic up there. They can work in the cold as opposed to some city kid we would stick out there. Is there been much training and working to bring people out there into operations and into active work on the projects as they go?
I think going forward, this is definitely something the operators can think about. Like, how are they going to utilize First Nations communities in their workforce? How are they going to, you know, help startup businesses, small businesses? You know, these are things that we want to be part of. And I think the conversation is going to go towards that direction versus, you know, saying no to any sort of project. I think if companies can bring these communities on board right from the get-go, so that they can actually see what goes on with these projects. Like they can look at the environmental assessments that happened prior to anything being constructed. They can follow along with the regulatory process. They can follow along with the construction process. And then when it goes live, you know, community members need to see projects from start to finish. And sometimes what we're seeing is that we're only brought in on the construction phase of it without ever seeing the regulatory approval part of it, which could take years, if not decades. So I think operators definitely they need to bring these communities on faster, quicker, and they need to definitely have them being part, you know, need to include them as part of that process because when you see how long a project takes, when you have this person saying no at the end, you can counter some of their arguments. And you could say, well, you're saying no to something that happened, 5 years ago, and we remediated that situation, or we came up with this solution. So it actually helps community members come up with solutions rather than problems along the way.
Yeah, well, and it was very important for us when we would bring monitors in and do this. They knew it wasn't tokenism. We want to bring local community members out. We're going to see things that I don't know as a contractor who's coming up, and they can go back to the community and say, yes, we communicated that we approve of this. We know what's going on up there. We know what's going to happen, and we've avoided difficulties. I think the old ways often used to be just to try and cut a check to somebody, make it quiet, and just plow on through it. But it's not like that at all anymore.
No, and it shouldn't be. And I think this is where our voices are starting to be heard. And as I've said before, we're not saying no to development. We're saying no to the consult siloing, and you need to have us be part of those projects. And it's not just in a token way. Like, people genuinely learn going through this process. If I hadn't gone through this with my own community, I wouldn't have known what had happened from start to finish. And then it later influenced my decision in, becoming involved in oil and gas. So, there's a lot of key learnings out there. And I think if we can include First Nations in these learnings, then we can all become part of the solution as opposed to creating problems in the future.
Yeah, no, that's great. So, what have you been working on lately with the Macdonald-Laurier Institute? What can we look forward to you releasing or speaking to in coming days?
Um, right now, the hot topic is residential school, and I think with the search for unmarked graves, it's going to be in the media, or it's going to be in the spotlight for quite some time. But we do address different issues, especially when it comes to fisheries. That's also going to be an ongoing issue. Natural resource projects, pipelines. As as things start to get underway in our economy, and things start moving a little bit faster, you'll start to see these issues arise again. So we're just kind of addressing the current issues, and then just going from there. So it could be anything: fisheries, it could be pipelines. You just never know.
Yeah, well, and the residential school discoveries, I mean, have been just horrifying for everybody, and kind of drove home what we always knew. We just really had it brought into our faces, and hopefully some productive ends come from this in the long run. It certainly made everybody much more sensitive and difficult these days.
Exactly. I think it just brought more awareness out there. Like you said, you kind of always knew this was out there, but people may not have known about the unmarked graves, and it just sheds a light on the Indigenous issues that are out there, which encompasses everything. So we just never know what's going to be thrown into front and center. So yeah, we just take it day by day, and we just deal with it as it comes.
Well, great. Well, where can people go to find more information on what you've been working on and what's going to be coming up?
Usually a lot of the op-eds and webinars are on the Macdonald-Laurier site, so people can visit that and see what, the current topics are. Twitter is usually a pretty good feed for all the current issues, and my stance on different Indigenous issues. And yeah, just I think Twitter is probably the best place, but the Macdonald-Laurier Institute is definitely another really good resource.
Yeah, well, Twitter's good for that one-on-one engagement, maybe even a little bit of scrapping sometimes, but the deeper reads, the Macdonald-Laurier Institute, I imagine would provide that.
Exactly.
So great. Well, thank you very much for joining me today. I appreciate the update and what you're up to, and I'd just like to hear some voices of optimism and cooperation. Not that black and white. This is on, this is off. Like we really can all work together and benefit from some of the resources we're blessed with out here in Canada.
Exactly.
Great. Well, I look forward to talking to you again sometime soon.
Yeah. Well, thanks for having me on your show.
All right. Thanks, Melissa. All right. Well, that was refreshing. Like I said, I like having some positive policy, discussions and talk at times. I mean, let's talk about solutions, not fighting. The First Nations aren't going away. Energy demand isn't going away. how can we work together? How can we all benefit from this? Melissa's definitely working proactively on these sorts of things. And there are a lot of other people out there as well who are. We just don't always hear about them. Again, getting back to my favorite target, the mainstream media, they want to report on conflict. They want to report and talk to whoever the most haywire opponent to a project is, whether they actually speak for the people out there or not. And some good rational discussions benefit us all. So Melissa's doing great work at the Macdonald-Laurier Institute, and we're making progress with development. As she said, we got other challenges with fisheries and resource development in general, mining, hydroelectric, you name it. We've got to get better at this rather than fighting about it all the bloody time to get anything done. So, and that's it for today's show. But I do have to thank everybody who's tuned in, and thank all of you who have subscribed to the Western Standard. That's what keeps us up and rolling. If you haven't subscribed already, I know I got to keep nagging you, but it's important. Subscribe to the Western Standard. Go there, westernstandardonline.com. If you're watching this on YouTube, that's the great thing with alternative media. It's user-driven, though. We need your help to keep doing this. So, share the YouTube video. Subscribe on YouTube if you haven't already. If you're listening on a podcast, just to the audio, we've got that up there. Write a little review. It brings it up a little on the algorithms, and more people will be able to find this and listen to it. If you're on Facebook, hit that like button. Follow us on Facebook. We put our news stories up there all the time. And as well, I've got to, of course, shout out to our sponsors who've been helping us out all the way along here with Resistance Coffee. Those guys, great coffee, great company, out of the West. Make sure, go by there, resistancecoffee.com. You're buying coffee anyway. You're drinking coffee anyway. We know that. You got to have it. It's lifeblood. Well, you can get a local source, and they're going to give 10% of your coffee purchase to a good cause, not some of that woke crap and such. It's going to go towards things that support your rights. And when you go to resistancecoffee.com, your first purchase, put in Western Standard, all one word, and you'll get 10% off for that first trial. They ship right to your door. If you get a large enough order, shipping's even free. It just comes there, saves you a trip to the store, and you get some great coffee, and you support good causes. Other good cause, of course, the Canadian Coalition for Firearm Rights. These guys are out there pushing back. The Liberals pushed too far in the 90s with, what was it back then? C68? I'm not sure. It's been quite a while, but it was Alan Rock pushing it with the registry. It failed, but it just turned firearm ownership upside down in Canada. And the Liberals haven't given up. They're just doing it incrementally now. They're coming after your firearms, your property, your ability to go out and use safely and enjoy firearms. Well, the Canadian Coalition for Firearm Rights is standing up for your right to do that. They're actually taking the federal government to court on your behalf to make sure that they don't get away with this. So make sure to go there to the Canadian, or was it firearmrights.ca, firearmrights.ca, and click Why Join. And they'll lay out all the reasons. They'll lay out what they're fighting, what they're pushing, what they're protecting, and why it's important for you to help them so they can help you. So thank you all again for subscribing, for tuning in. We'll have another show coming up quite soon. Keep an eye on these channels. We have the pipeline coming on. Nathan will be back, Gita from his vacation. He'll be doing shows. And we got some stuff from Mark Petroni coming along. So, the digital channels of the Western Standard are going to be getting busier and busier, giving you good content so you don't have to keep consuming that crap from the mainstream media. I'll see you next time.